Anti-Semitism is a virus, and because the administration and woke university presidents aren't stepping in, we're seeing it spread. We have to act, and House Republicans will speak to this fateful moment with moral clarity.
House Speaker Mike Johnson yesterday announcing more investigations into anti-Semitism on college campuses, on top of the Education Committee's ongoing probe. 5 more committees are set to investigate different aspects of these protests, including who is funding them and whether foreign students on visas are engaging in the demonstrations as well. The speaker also calling on President Biden to visit Columbia University to see the chaos for himself. Police were called in overnight to clear agitators occupying Hamilton Hall. Joining me now is Texas Congressman Ronny Jackson. He's a member of the House Armed Services, Foreign Affairs, and Agricultural Committees. He's also a member of the GOP Doctors Caucus and a former White House physician. Congressman, good to see you. Thanks very much for being here. Your reaction to this anti-Semitism on college campuses?
Well, I think it's repulsive, Maria. I just can't believe it's happening. It's unbelievable that's happening here in our country. These people need to be charged appropriately. I mean, I want to ask the question. I know a lot of people have asked this. Where is Joe Biden in all of this, right? This man has a lot of responsibilities. He has a head of state responsibility. You know, he has a responsibility as our commander-in-chief, but he's the chief executive in this country. He needs to speak out on these domestic issues. He needs to be loud, and he needs to be decisive on this. Where is his DOJ? Where is his FBI? You know, they're all too happy to drag somebody off the sidewalk who's praying in front of an abortion clinic, yet they won't do anything about these hate crimes. These are hate crimes. This is hate speech. These are people that are being physically attacked and threatened by people that are actually saying that they want to exterminate Jews. The DOJ and the FBI should be all over this, and Biden should be out every day speaking about this. So I'm disgusted with what's going on in the university. I can't believe that we have an entire generation of kids that have been brainwashed here. I think the real root of the cause here is a lot of these radical progressive professors at these universities. That's where the real root cause is. And we've got to do something about this. And I'm glad the House is stepping up to the plate. The various committees are going to be looking at this, as you just mentioned, seeing what we can do about this. There's a lot of issues here. I would add the Armed Services Committee to that as well, because I'm on Armed Services, and we have billions of dollars that go to these universities in the form of research and development grants for defense purposes. And I personally don't want anybody at these universities, these professors or these students, working on defense projects that have national security implications when they are openly supporting Hamas and terrorists.
Well, you are right. I mean, there were some faculty members that were arrested as well. In the last couple of days, there were faculty members participating in some of these protests. NYPD arrested approximately 300 people between both Columbia University and City College, New York, just last night. New York City Mayor Eric Adams and the NYPD commissioner are expected to address the protests this morning. Former President Trump, though, said what you said. He says we need to hear from President Biden. Where is he? Watch this.
We have to stop the anti-Semitism that's just pervading our country right now, and Biden has to do something. Biden is supposed to be the voice of our country, and it's certainly not much of a voice. I don't think he's able to do it. I don't think he's got what it takes to do it, but he's got to. He's got to strengthen up, and he's got to be heard.
Congressman, it is really amazing that we haven't heard from President Biden on any of this, although I should say that the White House said that it is condemning the anti-Semitism.
Well, the president's not saying that, right? He needs to get out and say that. He's been trying to walk this line and appease the protesters. I mean, they're the one part of his base that he still thinks he potentially has. I mean, he's lost everybody else. I mean, he's losing the black vote. He's losing the Hispanic vote, women, blue-collar people, union workers. He's losing everybody. So he's desperately trying to hang on to this part of his party, this part of his base at any cost. And it's just disgusting. This is happening. I think President Trump is absolutely right. I don't think this man is capable of providing the leadership that we need to get us out of this. Now, President Trump would do that, but he's not. And then we need leadership at the state and local level, too. It's insane that these people get arrested, they get brought in, and, it's not that the charges get dismissed. They don't even get charged. These DAs are just are letting these people walk out in a matter of hours, and they go right back to the protest areas and set up more tents and continue to do this. Yeah. There have to be consequences. This is a generation that has lived with no consequences, and they are seriously entitled, and it's amazing to see what's happening here. I would not give a dime to any of these Ivy League institutions or any of these other institutions that are doing this. I want to make sure that we don't give them any money as a federal government either.
Who do you think is behind these protests?
Well, we need to find out. I think there's a lot of NGOs here. I think there are foreign governments that are giving money to the NGOs. Obviously, I think Soros is a part of this. The FBI should be investigating that too.
Yeah.
They should be investigating Soros. He's inciting, violence, and inciting like hate crimes.
Yeah.
I mean, those things need to be looked at. And if we had a good DOJ, we would be getting answers to those questions right now.
Well, incredibly, they're not giving us those answers. We want to know who they're investigating, but we'll tell you this. They're definitely investigating Donald Trump. President Trump is going to be back on the campaign trail today after spending the last couple of days in a New York courtroom. Obviously, this is by design. They want him in that courtroom during this election season while Joe Biden goes campaigning everywhere. Today, he'll travel to Waukesha, Wisconsin. Then he'll go to Freeland, Michigan. Trump is also featured on the cover of Time magazine, laying out what a second term would look like. Look at this. If he wins, he says he was too nice during his first term, according to this article, and he's planning a serious crackdown on illegal migrants, he told me, in January. But the first presidential debate will not be as soon as he wishes. The Presidential Debates Commission said that the first debate is still slated for September 16th at Texas State University. Congressman, having a debate on September 16th, you actually could see some people vote even before that, right?
Oh, that's right. There's going to be people that are going to be voting in certain states before that. The debates need to take place before the voting starts.
Yeah.
The president has said that. Biden, unfortunately, had a gaffe and said that he would debate Trump. I think his team probably freaked out when he said that. They're going to do everything they can to keep this man off the debate stage. Regardless of the criticism that he gets for not debating President Trump, it'll be nothing compared to the revelation that takes place when you get these two men on stage together. The whole country is going to see head-to-head how incompetent and how mentally incapable Joe Biden is, and they don't want that. They want to avoid that at all costs. That's why they keep him off the campaign trail, and that's why they do their best to keep President Trump occupied in a courtroom and spending all his money on these legal issues that they've created.
Wow, everybody sees this straight away. Congressman, it's good to see you this morning. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Maria.
Congressman Ronny Jackson. Stay with us. We'll be right back.